Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper moment number 72. The mission of our Digging Deeper moments is to take God's Word to God's world. We're really glad that you joined us. Last week in our study, we saw that the Hebraic style of writing is repetitive. That is, it makes a statement, then it repeats it in a little different way. This adds clarity, fullness, and richness to what is written. This is called recursive writing. We also saw that in Genesis 1:26, when God says that He made Adam and Eve in His image and likeness, that these two words basically mean the same thing, similar, like, a copy of, or resembling. But though these two words are synonymous, they also have different nuances to their meanings. The word for image, selem, focuses on how the copy or the resemblance or image represents the original, whereas the word likeness, demuth, focuses on the relation of the copy to the world. And so, putting these two words together, we see that God made human beings two-dimensional. One vertically to relate to Him, and the other horizontally to represent Him on the earth. We now need to tackle two other statements found in Genesis 1:26. The first is, let us make, and the second is, let them have. Let's read this together. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Many modern versions of the Bible fail to fully convey what the Hebrew text is actually saying here. And this is important because an important point is at stake. The way that verse 26 is written in Hebrew, with the phrase, let us make, followed by the phrase, let them have, it is very clear in Hebrew that this marks purpose or result. Hebrew grammarians are in agreement about this. And so what this verse means in the Hebrew is this: let us make man in our image and likeness so that they may rule. Most translations don't put that "so that" in there, but it would be proper to do so. The purpose for which we were created in the image and likeness of God was so that we could relate to God and so that we could relate to the earth on God's behalf. This is why the rest of Genesis 1:26 says, let them have dominion, rulership, over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over everything that creeps upon the face of the earth. You and I were made to relate to God so that we could rule for God. I think that's pretty cool, don't you think? You're a ruler, you're a king, you're a queen. That's why God made us. But wait, there's more. Verse 27 goes on to repeat, there's that Hebrew style of writing, that humans were made in God's image. But by now, anytime we see repetition, we should begin expecting to learn something new because this repetition is adding some important details. And the details that are given here are about our being created in God's image. Let's read it, verse 27. It says, so God made man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now, there are three things stated here, and the way these are written in Hebrew also tells us some interesting things. The first statement that says, so God created man in His own image, this is written pretty much like a normal Hebrew sentence. So there's nothing really different about that. But the other two statements, in the image of God He created him, and male and female He created them, they're not written like a normal Hebrew sentence. Now we don't see that in the English, but when you study this in the Hebrew, it does. It becomes very apparent. The way these are written makes it clear that these two statements are a parenthesis or a footnote. In other words, they're added detail. They're added details about what it means to be created in God's image. In other words, when it says in verse 27, so God created man in His own image, now He's giving you added detail about what it means to be created in God's image. So He's adding new information. This is very important because this verse 27, is often taken to mean that the image of God is reflected in humanity's maleness and femaleness. But this is not what it's saying at all. We know this because verse 28 says, then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. When we look at verse 27, in relationship with verse 28, guess what we see? We see more repetition. And by now, when we see repetition, we should know that we're going to get added detail. This time, the repetition is seen in how these two verses are structured together. Now, this may seem like a little bit complicated for this kind of a lesson. Just hang on for a moment. But the way these two verses are arranged is in classic Hebrew style, something called a chiasmus. A chiasmus is like an hourglass. The top and the bottom mirror each other. They repeat each other. So an outline form would be AB, BA, 1, 2, 2, 1. This is very common throughout the Old Testament, and it's very common in Hebrew. Now watch how these two verses mirror each other when we outline them. Verse 27 says, "So God created mankind in His image. A, in the image of God He created them. B, male and female He created them." Verse 28, "Then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply." That's B. Letter A, subdue it and rule over it. So the first letter A correlates to the second letter A. In other words, letter A is talking about letter A, and the first letter B refers to the second letter B. So they're talking about the same things, just adding different details. So the first letter A, made in the image of God, is connected to man's rulership, which is the second A. The first B, male and female, is connected to the second B, be fruitful and multiply. Don't try to get all the details, but hear what I'm saying, because I'm saying all this to say this. What this means is that the divine image in humanity is not reflected in maleness and femaleness. Divine image is reflected in humanity's relationship and rulership. And this is very important, particularly today, in some of the discussions that we have in our culture. Being male and female is not the basis for the being made in the image of and likeness of God. It's the basis for the blessing of fruitfulness and multiplication. Male and female gender is how humans multiply and fill the earth and are blessed, and that word blessed means to be increased. This seems to be like splitting hairs. You say, Pastor Bob, you're splitting hairs. It's not. This is quite significant, and it has tremendous bearing on our identity as human beings, because it means that each man and each woman bears the image of God apart from the other. God made male and female in the image of God. He didn't just make man, Adam, in the image of God. And we don't have to be married, because if you put these together and say male and femaleness reflect the divine image, then we have to be married to bear the image of God. But that's not what the Hebrew is saying. It's saying every man and every woman individually, whether married or not, bears the image of God. This is highly significant because it removes sexuality as the means by which humanity bears the image of God. And it makes sexuality in human beings about procreation. And there's other things that the text will say later in this story, but for now we're staying on this particular point. And by doing this, it's creating a separation, hear me, between religion and sexuality. This is something the ancient world could never do. It never did. In fact, when you study ancient religions, you will find them filled with sexuality. Not only is sexuality included in their worship and how they worship, the gods themselves were obsessed with sexuality. And creation itself is the result of sexual acts between the gods. And so what we've already seen in previous lessons is that the Genesis creation account, takes the myths out of creation. It demythologizes the creation story. We also see that the Genesis account decentralizes the creation, whereas in the ancient creation accounts that were popular at the time, they're filled with creation stories being the result of sexual activity of the gods. Summarizing all this, we see that the Genesis 1 creation account gives us the 3 R's of the creation of humanity thus far. Number 1, relationship. We are created to relate to God. Number 2, rulership. We were created, male and female, in the image and likeness of God, to be rulers, to represent God on the earth. And thirdly, we were created male and female so that we could fulfill the blessing that was put upon us of reproduction, to multiply and fill the earth. We'll have more to say on this next week. But if this lesson helped you, please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel. I hope to see you next week.